On behalf of my dear wife and children, and on behalf of the chiefs and people of Asanteman, I bring you warm greetings. I'm deeply honored to stand before you at Howard University today, an institution whose history occupies a distinguished place in the intellectual, political, and social advancement of people of African descent. I express my sincere appreciation to the Executive Board of the Millennium Excellence Foundation and to the leadership of Howard University for extending this invitation to me and for creating this opportunity for us to reflect together upon matters that concern not merely Ghana or Africa, but the wider historical family of African peoples across the world. Howard University is more than an institution at which knowledge is transmitted and academic degrees are awarded. It's an institution of memory, intellectual courage, social responsibility, and service. Since its establishment, it has helped generations of men and women of African descent to demonstrate that education is not simply a pathway towards individual advancement, but also a responsibility towards society. Its commitment to truth and service makes this university an especially appropriate place to consider the relationship among governance, cultural preservation, traditional leadership, and the reconstruction of meaningful bonds between Africa and its diaspora. The theme placed before us is profound because it brings together three subjects that are too often considered separately. Governance concerns the organization of power and responsibility. Culture concerns the meaning that people give to their existence. And the diaspora concerns the survival of identity across geography, displacement, and historical rupture. Yet beneath all these three lies one fundamental question. How does a people organize itself, understand itself, and transmit to future generations an inheritance worthy of preservation? My proposition this evening is that traditional leadership, when exercised with integrity, wisdom, accountability, and respect for constitutional government, remains an important part of the answer to that question. Traditional leadership should not be understood merely as an institution inherited from the past, nor should culture be reduced to ceremonial display. Properly understood, both are living resources that can contribute to good governance, social cohesion, peace building, education, development, cultural confidence, and the renewal of relationship between Africa and the peoples of African descent throughout the world. Governance is frequently confused with government. Yet while government refers to the formal institutions of the state, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, ministries, public agencies, and the administrative machinery through which public policy is implemented, and governance is wider. It concerns the manner in which authority is acquired, exercised, limited, and transferred, how resources are managed, how disputes are resolved, how leaders are held accountable, how the vulnerable are protected, and how society defines and pursues the common good. Sure. A nation may possess an impressive constitution and yet experience poor governance. It may hold regular elections and still fail to provide justice, security, education, healthcare, or meaningful participation for substantial sections of its population. Sure. Institutions do not operate in a moral vacuum. They operate within cultures, habits, expectations, and systems of social obligation. Law is indispensable, but law alone cannot create a good society. A constitution may determine what a public official is permitted to do, but culture helps determine what society believes a responsible leader ought to do. Sure. A court may punish corruption after the offense has occurred. Still, society must also cultivate the moral conviction that public resources are held in trust and must not be treated as private property. Sure. A judicial decision may determine the legal rights of parties to a dispute, but judgment alone does not always restore damaged relationships within families and communities. Governance, therefore, requires more than institutional machinery. Sure. It requires legitimacy, trust, moral restraint, memory, and shared expectations, as well as citizens and leaders who understand that rights are inseparable from obligations and that power is inseparable from responsibility. Sure. Traditional African political systems understood this relationship between authority and moral obligation in ways that deserve serious academic attention. Leadership was rarely conceived merely as the possession of unrestricted power. The ruler was expected to protect the community, administer justice, preserve the land, defend the vulnerable, and maintain the people's inheritance. Sure. Authority was therefore accompanied by responsibility, and that principle remains relevant to our modern world. Power, separated from responsibility, becomes dangerous. Authority, separated from accountability, eventually loses legitimacy. And leadership that seeks privilege without accepting obligation weakens the institution from which that privilege derives. Sure. Permit me in this respect to draw upon the Asante constitutional tradition. The Asante political system is sometimes misunderstood by those who encounter only its visible manifestations: the golden stool, the royal umbrellas, the drums, the gold ornaments, the nameplates as they stand here, the swords, the procession, and the great ceremonies of state. These symbols are important because they are the visible language through which memory and authority are communicated. Sure. But beneath the splendor lies a sophisticated philosophy of political responsibility. Sure. A golden stool is not the private property of the Asante. It represents the unity, identity, historical continuity, and collective spirit of Asante man. The Asante is therefore not the owner of the nation, but its custodian, and that distinction is fundamental. The occupant of the golden stool received an inheritance that existed before him, and which must endure after him. He holds authority temporarily, but he holds the people's heritage in trust. The land, institutions, memories, and moral obligations associated with the stool cannot legitimately be reduced to the personal interest of the individual who occupies it. Sure. Because from this perspective, leadership is a form of trusteeship. The idea of trusteeship contains an important lesson for all systems of governance. We hold office temporarily. We inherit institutions from those who came before us. And although we exercise authority in the present, our decisions affect people who are not yet born. The leader who consumes everything for the advantage of the present generation has misunderstood the nature of stewardship. This principle has particular agency in an age of environmental degradation, uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources, and political decision-making dominated by short-term considerations. We did not create the rivers, forests, land, and ecological systems that sustain us. We inherited them. And whatever our authority may be today, we have no moral right to destroy the inheritance of generations unborn. Sure. Traditional governments also recommend Traditional governments also reminds us that legitimate authority requires consultation. Our people say, meaning that one head does not constitute a council. And we also say, meaning that wisdom does not reside in the head of one person alone. These are not merely attractive proverbs, they communicate a political philosophy. Our Santiago exercises authority through an established order of chiefs, queen mothers, elders, laborers, and recognized customary officers. Matters are considered, evidence may be heard, historical precedent may be recalled. Different perspectives may be presented, and decisions are shaped by consultation and concern for communal harmony. Consultation does not mean that leadership has no authority, nor does listening diminish the dignity of the leader. The leader who refuses to hear contrary opinion eventually becomes imprisoned by those who tell him only what he wishes to hear. Responsible leadership must therefore create room for difficult truth. The modern world sometimes equates decisiveness with refusing consultation. But our ancestors understood differently. They knew that the strength of a decision will depend upon the quality of deliberation that precedes it. This does not mean that traditional institutions should be romanticized, because no institution, traditional, political, religious, or academic, is beyond criticism or reform. And antiquity alone does not confer moral perfection. Traditional authority must justify its continuing relevance through service. A chief who is concerned only with ceremony, privileges, titles, and public honor gradually diminishes the institution he represents. At the same time, a traditional ruler who listens to his people, protects community resources, promotes education, mediates conflict, assists the vulnerable, and responds to contemporary challenges, strengthens both tradition and society. Traditional leadership in the 21st century cannot therefore be limited to festivals and ceremonial occasions. It must be capable of responding to educational inequality, unemployment, environmental degradation, land disputes, public health emergencies, community conflict, and the anxieties of young people. The palace must remain a guardian of memory, but it must also become a workshop for the future. This requires traditional institutions themselves to accept reform, because tradition must never become a shield behind which injustice, corruption, exploitation, or arbitrary authority are protected. The dignity of women and children must be defended. Young people must be heard. Persons with disabilities must not be marginalized. Community resources must be managed responsibly. Land administration must be transparent. And succession and customary processes must be conducted with integrity. The proper defense of tradition is therefore not an insistence that nothing should ever change, but the capacity to distinguish between enduring principles of an institution and those practices that require reconsideration. A tree survives because its roots hold firmly to the soil, but it also survives because its branches respond to the wind and reach towards the light, and so must our institutions. This brings me to culture. Culture is frequently treated as entertainment, appearing at festivals, tourism events, diplomatic ceremonies, and national celebrations, while being too often absent from serious conversations about development. governance and the future of society. This is a mistake, because culture is not merely music, dance, clothing, food and ceremony, important though these are. Culture includes language, morality, historical memory, family organization, spirituality, political philosophy, customary law, artistic knowledge, methods of conflict resolution, environmental understanding and ideas about what constitutes a good human life. Culture tells the people who they are and provides the intellectual and moral vocabulary through which people understand birth and death, childhood and adulthood, marriage and family, authority and responsibility, suffering and hope. A society that loses confidence in its culture eventually loses confidence in itself. But cultural preservation does not require us to free society at some imagined moment in the past. Culture is not a dead object to be placed behind glass. It is a living inheritance that must be understood, practiced, questioned, renewed, and transmitted. Modernity must not be confused with imitation. Africans should learn from the achievements of other civilizations and adopt useful technologies, scientific discoveries, sound administrative systems, and institutions that improve human life. But participation in the modern world should not require us to abandon our own languages, intellectual traditions, and historical consciousness. Progress should never require a people to despise themselves. This is why the preservation of African languages deserves urgent attention. Language is more than vocabulary. It carries history, humor, philosophy, moral reasoning, and the categories through which a people interprets reality. In our proverbs, appellations, songs, court language, and oral traditions, some ideas cannot always be fully translated into another language. When a language disappears, humanity does not merely lose a method of communication. Humanity loses a distinctive way of understanding the world. We must therefore ask ourselves difficult questions about how many African children can speak the languages of their grandparents fluently. How many, and I must confess, my children have been taught how to speak and now they are speaking regularly. When they were young, they thought they were American and British, but now they know that they are Ghanaians. And then how many understand the histories of their towns and villages and families? How many know the meanings carried by the symbols of their communities? And how many can interpret the proverb that once educated generations in ethics, responsibility, and social conduct? We cannot leave the answers to chance. Cultural preservation must become part of serious educational policy. Universities, traditional authorities, museums, families, churches, community institutions, and governments must work together to document endangered knowledge, record oral histories, preserve archives, and train younger generations to interpret their heritage. Technology must become an ally of cultural preservation. Our generation has tools that those before us could scarcely imagine, allowing voices that once existed only in human memory to be preserved, manuscripts to be digitized, historical photographs to be restored and archived, oral histories to be recorded, and endangered languages to be documented and taught across continents. Preservation must, however, remain ethical, because not every sacred object, ritual, or body or traditional knowledge is intended for unrestricted circulation. Cultural knowledge has custodians, contexts, and responsibilities. and digitization should preserve heritage without stripping it of dignity and meaning.
Sure.
It is within this discussion of history and identity that we must confront the experience of the global African diaspora.
Sure.
The diaspora emerged through several historical processes. Some Africans left the continent voluntarily in pursuit of education, commerce, employment, and opportunity. In contrast, millions of others were forcibly removed through systems of enslavement that inflicted immeasurable suffering upon Africa and its descendants.
Sure.
The transatlantic slave trade separated families, disrupted societies, and transported generations of African men, women, and children into systems that sought not only their labor but their humanity.
Sure.
The consequences of that history did not disappear with the abolition of slavery.
Sure.
They remain visible in questions of race, inequality, economic exclusion, cultural displacement, and the continuing struggle for equal citizenship and dignity.
Sure.
Yet the history of the African diaspora cannot be written only as a history of victory, because it is also a history of survival, resistance, political achievement, political courage, scientific innovation, and cultural creativity. Those who crossed the Atlantic under the conditions of extreme violence carried more than their bodies. They carried memory, spirituality, rhythm, agricultural knowledge, artistic traditions, and ideas about family and community.
Sure.
Under conditions designed to raise them, they recreated themselves.
Sure.
And across the Americas, the Caribbean, Europe, and elsewhere, African-descended communities transformed societies that had often denied them equality.
Sure.
The diaspora gave the world physicians, scientists, judges, political leaders, intellectuals, artists, educators, freedom fighters, entrepreneurs, and builders of institutions. It participated in movements against slavery, colonialism, segregation, apartheid, and racial injustice, supported struggles for African independence, and helped turn the liberation of Africa into global cause.
Sure.
Africa and its diaspora, therefore, owe one another a depth of recognition. The relationship cannot be understood as one in which Africa provides ancestral identity while the diaspora provides financial resources.
Sure.
That would be an impoverished interpretation.
Sure.
That would be an impoverished interpretation of a profound historical relationship. We are participants in one long historical conversation. Ghana has played an important role in efforts to rebuild these relationships, and initiatives such as the Year of Return and Beyond the Return have encouraged people of African descent to visit Ghana and reconnect with the continent.
Sure.
These initiatives have been valuable, but the relationship must now move beyond ceremonial homecoming.
Sure.
A photograph at a historic site does not by itself create belonging.
Sure.
An African name does not by itself create belonging. And attendance at a festival does not by itself create belonging. Belonging is created through relationship, understanding, responsibility, and sustained participation.
Sure.
The Akan concept of Sankofa invites us to return and retrieve what is valuable from the past.
Sure.
But Sankofa does not ask us to remain permanently facing backwards. To recover memory, to move into the future with greater wisdom. And the next phase of African diaspora relations must therefore move from symbolic return towards substantive partnership.
Sure.
Diaspora communities should not be regarded simply as sources of remittances, tourism, investment, or expertise, because they are part of the wider African historical family. Many seek not only commercial opportunity, but dignity, understanding, relationship, and meaningful participation.
Sure.
At the same time, Reconnection must be approached with humility on all sides, because Africa is not culturally uniform. Ghana is not a single historical community, and the continent contains many peoples, languages, political traditions, and experiences. Identities formed in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe under slavery, segregation, and racial discrimination developed within circumstances different from those in which ethnic, linguistic, and national identities developed within Africa. We must therefore listen to one another. Continental Africans must listen seriously to the experiences of racial injustice, cultural displacement, and historical dispossession carried by the diaspora communities. At the same time, members of the diaspora must also listen to Africa's experiences of colonialism, political struggle, poverty, state building, conflict, and development. Neither side should claim exclusive ownership of African identity. We must meet as relatives separated by history, now with the opportunity to construct a shared future. Traditional leaders. Traditional leadership can contribute significantly to this process because traditional institutions carry historical continuity in ways that governments cannot always provide. Governments can create diplomatic frameworks, immigration systems, investment policies, and legal structures, while traditional institutions can provide cultural interpretation, community entry, historical context, and a sense of belonging. The responsibility must, however, be exercised with integrity. The reconnection of the African family must never become a marketplace in which belonging is sold. Traditional titles must not become commercial rewards. Historical claims must not be invented to satisfy emotional expectations. And sacred institutions should not be trivialized for tourism or spectacle. To be received into an African community is to enter a relationship, and every meaningful relationship carries responsibilities. If the diaspora is to reconnect meaningfully with Africa, then reconnection should contribute to education, cultural preservation, enterprise, community development, scholarship, and mutual understanding. Traditional institutions can help establish processes for community engagement and protect diaspora visitors and investors from exploitation. So, traditional leaders must also protect local communities from arrangements that disregard their rights and livelihoods. The objective must be shared and sustainable prosperity. This naturally brings us to the university's responsibility. Universities are among the great custodians of civilization. They preserve knowledge, interrogate assumptions, challenge falsehood, train professionals, and shape the intellectual imagination of society. But universities must also learn to listen. For too long, some African systems of knowledge entered academic institutions only after they had been interpreted elsewhere. Knowledge preserved orally was sometimes dismissed as inferior to knowledge preserved in writing. While African institutions were often studied through conceptual categories that engaged insufficiently with African societies themselves. This imbalance must be corrected without abandoning academic rigor. The elder who preserved the history of a community, the queen mother who understands the structure of the royal family, the linguist who preserves court language, the farmer who understands the local ecological system, and the customary authority who has spent decades resolving disputes may possess forms of knowledge worthy of serious scholarly attention. Such knowledge must not be romanticized. It should be examined critically. Historical claims must be investigated. Evidence must matter, and contradictions must be acknowledged. Yet, intellectual rigor and intellectual respect are not enemies. The university and the palace should not exist in separate worlds. The university can assist traditional institutions in documenting histories, preserving archives, strengthening administration and evaluating development programs, and preparing younger generations for leadership. In contrast, traditional institutions can help investors understand the cultural, moral, and historical environments within which African societies operate. Scholarship within community. Scholarship without community can become detached. Tradition without scholarship can become vulnerable to distortion. When the two cooperate, knowledge becomes both rigorous and socially meaningful. It is in this spirit that I believe Howard University, Ghanaian institutions, and traditional authorities can build a serious program of intellectual cooperation. There is room for sustained comparative research into traditional constitutionalism, customary law, mediation, restorative justice, land governance, the role of queen mothers, environmental stewardship, and community mobilization. There is room for a major program of digital heritage preservation that connects archives, oral histories, royal records, manuscripts, and endangered cultural knowledge. There is room for student and faculty exchanges in which young people encounter African societies and diaspora communities not merely as visitors, as asset learners and contributors. There is room for professional partnership that name physicians, lawyers, engineers, academics, artists, historians, entrepreneurs, and community leaders across the African world. And there is also room for an enduring Howard-Manshia dialogue through which scholars and traditional leaders might examine the most important questions confronting governance, culture, and African diaspora relations. Our objective should not be to celebrate traditional institutions uncritically, but to study them seriously, because neither modern institutions nor traditional institutions should fear examination, and truth strengthens institutions that deserve to survive. I wish to finally address the young people present here, and through you, young people throughout the African world. You are heirs to a history that contains both extraordinary suffering and extraordinary achievement. And you have inherited technological possibilities that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Within seconds, you can connect Accra to Washington, Kumasi with Kingston, Lagos with London, and Johannesburg with Toronto. But technological connection is not the same as human unity. Unity requires knowledge, trust, discipline, and responsibility. Do not allow yourself to define Africa entirely. Do not allow others to define Africa entirely for you. Study its history in its complexity. Learn its languages. Examine its institutions. Understand its achievements and failures. And do not approach culture only through fashion, music, and social media. However valuable these expressions may be, heritage requires deeper engagement. At the same time, you should not accept every inherited practice without question. Yes, because respect for tradition does not require intellectual silence. Ask questions, investigate claims, challenge injustice, preserve what is valuable, correct what can be corrected, and not add to the inheritance through your own creativity. The future of African culture will not be secured by elders alone. It will be secured when young people discover when they inherit within their inheritance intellectual and moral resources that help them confront the problems of their own generation. You are not required to choose between being modern and being African. You may be a scientist, physician, engineer, lawyer, whatever, scholar of the highest international standing, and remain deeply grounded in the cultural inheritance from which you emerged. Indeed, the greatest contribution Africa can make to the world will not come from imitating others perfectly, but from participating confidently in global civilization by contributing knowledge, institutions, values, and creativity that arise from our own historical experience. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, perhaps what we ultimately require is a new conception of global African responsibility. National citizenship will remain important. A Ghanaian remains a Ghanaian. An African American remains American. A Jamaican remains Jamaican. And a Brazilian of African descent remains Brazilian. Beyond these national identities, however, there can exist a moral consciousness that recognizes a shared historical connection and shared responsibility for the future. That responsibility includes preserving memory, strengthening education, opposing racism, expanding opportunity, developing African institutions, promoting ethical investment, supporting scholarships, and defending human dignity wherever it is threatened. Such unity must never become hostility towards others. The suffering contained within African history should not teach us hatred. It should teach us justice. Historical experience should make us defenders of dignity, not only for Africans, but for humanity. The relationship between Ghana, Africa, and the global African diaspora must therefore be founded on more than ancestry alone. Ancestry tells us that we are connected, while responsibility tells us that we must do with that connection. What we must do with that connection? We must move from occasional visits to enduring institutions, from symbolic embrace to intellectual cooperation, from nostalgia to development, from the language of return to the practice of belonging, from remembering shared suffering to building shared strength, from sentiment to structure, from memory to responsibility, from connection to collaboration, and from the shared path towards a deliberately constructed future. There is an account proverb which says, meaning that when a single tree stands alone against the storm, it may fall. The strength of the forest lies not in the isolation of its trees, but in the relationship among them. Their trunks may stand separately, and their branches may grow in different directions, but beneath the soil, their roots strengthen the same earth. So it is with the global African family. Our nations are different, our histories have followed different paths, our cultures have developed into different circumstances, and our experiences are not identical. Our features can be strengthened through deliberate cooperation. There's another proverb. In Sabakun Katek Nyamieni, meaning that one hand cannot lift a heavy load. The work before us is too great for one nation, one university, one government, and one traditional institution or one generation. Africa cannot undertake it without its diaspora. The diaspora cannot undertake it without meaningful engagement with Africa. Traditional leadership cannot undertake it without scholars and young people. Universities cannot undertake it without communities. And governments alone cannot undertake it without the confidence and participation of the citizens. We must therefore live the load together, preserving culture not because we are afraid of the future, but because the people who understand themselves can enter the future with confidence. Strengthening governance, not simply to make institutions more efficient, but to make authority more accountable, humane and just, and ensuring that traditional leadership remains worthy of respect by making service, integrity, and responsibility the foundations of its legitimacy. Let us strengthen the bond between Ghana and the global African diaspora, not merely through ceremonies and declarations, but through scholarship, education, investment, cultural preservation, service, enterprise, healing, and enduring human relationships. Let the colleagues in the university meet not as rivals, but as partners in the pursuit of knowledge. And let Africa and its diaspora meet not simply as people reunited by memory, but as partners committed to building institutions that would outlive us. Let our young people inherit not only the stories of what our ancestors endured, but also the confidence to create what our ancestors could only imagine. Let the memory of separation inspire the labor of reunion and let the wisdom of the past guide us while the future remain the principal object of our work.
Surely.
May Howard University continue to uphold truth, serve as an intellectual courage, and may the partnership between Ghana and the global African diaspora grow from strength to strength. May our traditional institutions remain living sources of wisdom, responsibility, and unity. May the generations that come after us look back this period and say that we did more than speak of African unity.
Surely.
We gave it institutions. May they say that we did more than preserve the memory of our ancestors and light their inheritance. May they say that when history allowed our generation to reconnect the African world, we did not waste it. May Almighty God bless our university, bless the global African family, bless the United States of America, and bless the Republic of Ghana, and bless us all. Thank you very much.